And I think finding that right middle way and not telling your customer, well, you need to have the Madagascan because it's much better for you. And by the way, it's much more subtle. But that's not our job. Our job ultimately is to listen to our customer and maybe take them by the hand a little bit, but not be pedantic and say, well, you have to have this because it's the best thing.
Hi, I'm Belden Mankis. Welcome to The Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders actually are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is Max Dubiel, co-founder of Redemption Roasters, the social impact coffee business working to reduce reoffending in the UK through training and employment. When Max joined me back in May 2024, we talked about Redemption's purpose, creating measurable outcomes for prison leavers, and the strategic sweet spot that allows the business to balance profit and impact. A lot's happened since then. Redemption's raised fresh funding to support its growth and continue expanding its retail footprint, all while deepening how it measures and reports its social impact. I'm really eager to reconnect with Max to explore how the team has navigated this next chapter. Max, welcome back to The Purposeful Strategist.
Thanks, Belden. Nice to be back.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. Really great. So my understanding, as I said, is that a lot's happened since we spoke. So what's been the big changes with Redemption Roasters over the last couple of years?
Yeah, lots of changes. Feels like a company of our stage in the life cycle of companies is a different company every sort of 3 to 6 months. And that is made up by the many stakeholders that are involved, but then also we're a bricks and mortar business. So that is an element which changes when you're growing or when you're consolidating. So what's happened? We raised quite a bit of capital and successfully closed that round. Generally, our cap table consists of the earlier round investors were friends and family, then sort of slightly more professional investors, your social impact funds. And then in the last round, for the first time, we had big corporates, Macquarie headlining, and Rothschild was also invested. So small ticket, but big name. With that more professional cap table came a good chunk of capital that we invested. We opened 4 new sites in relative close proximity, time-wise, not location-wise. And a couple of things happened. I think the overall market became more challenging. Hospitality in the UK is no secret, is struggling. So our existing estate suddenly performed less well than it used to. And then some of the new sites that we opened didn't perform as well as we had hoped. So from riding the roller coaster very high and sort of thinking, wow, this is all going swimmingly, to one where we're like, oh wow, actually our cash flow is a problem and it's something we need to fix. About maybe a year ago, maybe a bit more than a year ago, we made quite a few changes. So restructured the head office, had to let quite a few people go. Those are difficult decisions. We closed 2 sites. We re-geared our existing leases, which is another way of saying you go to your landlords and you say, look, we've got an issue here. Can you please help? And most landlords are open to that conversation in different forms. We looked at pretty much every contract we had in the business. Procurement-wise, we looked at if there are any synergies. And overall, with all those changes done and dusted, within about 3 months, we saw a big uptick in performance, mostly in the bottom line. We're no longer losing money. We were losing money before that. And so we're profitable again, but not through the amazing performance of our top line, which has more or less stayed the same in the shops. The wholesale business has actually grown quite a bit. It is growing sort of 20-25% year on year. And that's great. And there's also down to some of the investments we've made. The main thing I think that sets us apart from struggling hospitality businesses right now is that we've got really good cost control, become very diligent on that front. And I feel like the market is just moves in waves. And at the moment, hospitality is not an amazing business to be in, but these things change. And we've sort of braced ourselves now for the worst. And we're looking forward to things relaxing a bit again. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing an uptick in sales. We're seeing an uptick in like-for-likes.
And what's the footprint of the business now? You know, how many outlets do you have? Where do they tend to be? And what's the sort of balance between the wholesale and the retail side?
Yeah. So we've got 12 sites trading at the moment. And we have a wholesale business that supplies about 300 clients on a regular basis. That translates into top line. I think we're doing about 10.5 million this year. 3/4 of that is the stores. 1/4 of that is the wholesale business.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really struck me when we spoke last time, and I'm sure is still an important thing, is the extent to which you're building skills and capability for people who, are in a place in their life where being able to get back on a stable employment footing really makes a difference. What's all that look like now?
Yeah, that has definitely improved. I was going to say that's been a steady factor, but actually it's improved a lot. It's a difficult area not to cut corners in when otherwise you're making cuts. But I guess it's also an area where you can be a bit more savvy and work with third sector organizations where you can attract more funding, grant funding, government funding. We've done that very successfully. So we are currently training in 4 prisons across the country, barista skills and espresso machine technician skills. And we have an in the community academy here at our head office where we teach prison leavers coffee skills. About 30% of our workforce in the shops are prison leavers. So that's the highest it's ever been.
Yeah, I was going to say that seems like a noticeable sort of move up in terms of that percentage from last time.
I think the last time we spoke, it must have been around the just under 20% mark. And we were actually questioning whether any higher is sustainable. But we've got a brilliant team and we've managed to keep that number without it being to the detriment of the business or the training capabilities or the support.
As you've been through that, I mean, one of the things that strikes me is that many people say, the best time to start a new business is actually during a recession because it forces you to build lean. And it sounds like you've sort of been through a bit of that, even though you're up and running, which I suspect makes it a little bit harder. But do you feel that sort of positioned you now to maintain that kind of leanness, that focus on cost, that sort of making sure that every penny you spend is going to the right place? Do you think you'll be able to sustain that as you keep growing?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm always fascinated by that stat that most successful businesses are founded in times of crisis. And I absolutely think so. I think when you look at business really naively, you think, well, it all moves in a straight line and businesses just grow at a certain percentage a year. But it never looks like that. It's always a really squiggly line that moves up and down at what seems like completely random intervals. And then it's up to you as a business leader how well you cope in the various scenarios. And I think if you've had a couple of times where you've had to downsize, it really means you've future-proofed your business, but also the culture and the ability of the business to adapt. And even the largest, most profitable businesses do it, right? I mean, just look at layoffs at Meta and Google, and they're not doing it because it's fun, or they're not doing it because they absolutely have to, but they're doing it because it makes the business more future-proof.
Over this period of time, has your own sense of what success means for Redemption Roasters, has that changed, or is it still pretty much the same?
I mean, I guess in times you define it differently depending on how well you're doing, right? I mean, if you're seeing lots of hospitality businesses failing, especially those you used to look up to and think, wow, these guys have made it, then simply by being here and doing profitable numbers whilst having a social impact that's also a drag on the profit and numbers is already an achievement. And I think quite a few hospitality and then retail businesses are seeing it from that perspective at the moment. If I told my investors 2 years ago that we'll be proud to just exist and do single-digit EBITDA numbers, they wouldn't have been very impressed. And you never foresee the market and where it's heading.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking about investors, it does seem to me the issue of, are they aligned with what we're really trying to do is a big one. How does that change? You sort of talked about they wouldn't be impressed with single-digit EBITDA numbers. How's all that evolved? Is there ever this sense of, well, they said they were kind of lined up with us when they got on board, but now all we hear from them is, where the numbers? How does all that play out?
I think our cap table, the large majority of our investors look very favorably on our impact and on our mission as a business. So we're lucky in the sense that we don't have sort of your hard-nosed private equity type investor who are just scrutinizing you on how much money you can pay back. I think most of our investors have a longer-term view and also have a regard for the fact that we're doing some really good stuff and that we're creating some tangible impact that isn't just window dressing, but that's something which you can measure in KPIs like our percentage of workforce, which I mentioned earlier. We're lucky from that perspective. We don't have anyone sort of breathing down our necks, threatening that they will, I don't know, do something silly. And in another sense, we've also never given away voting shares. So Ted and I are the only shareholders who have voting rights, which has helped in just sort of streamlining the decision making in the business. And we now have Rothschild and Macquarie as board observers. And that's really good. And that keeps us on track in terms of accountability, in terms of making sure everything's above board. And our FD prepares a really good board pack every board meeting. So from that perspective, it is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. How often, just out of curiosity, how often do you have a board meeting? I'm always interested in that question because I find it ranges all over the place.
Twice a year.
Okay. So not all that frequently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. And how's your own sort of leadership style, if I could use that phrase? How's that changed? How have you shifted what you do and how you think about things and how you interact with people in the business?
Probably depends on the day of the week.
Just like human beings, you mean?
Exactly. I think one thing that we learned relatively early, sort of maybe 5 years ago, was the importance of really good hiring and management protocols. These methodologies, personally, we use manager tools. I mean, there's lots of methodologies out there. I think the most important thing is that you have a methodology that you stick to. We're hiring some important positions right now, and hiring is the most important thing you do. If you get nothing else right as a business leader, as long as you hire the right people and they make good decisions subsequently, then you're pretty much winning. So I think it's a really daunting task, and one also that has a lot of sort of snake oil in, and people say, oh, I'm a good people's person and I can sit down for coffee with someone and I can assess their potential. That's hugely rubbish. At the end of the day, there are certain methods of assessment, and the best way to do this is to standardize them and to make sure that even if you've had a crap day, or your business partner or another interviewer on the day may have, I don't know, a stereotype, or may have certain views of a previous employer of an applicant, you sort of need to set all those things aside and purely assess somebody on the performance in an interview and how they react to the questions and how they can present their experience. I think seeing the importance of good management and hiring methodology is definitely one thing that I've learned over the years.
I'm not sure, but I thought you just sort of gave a name to a particular methodology you use, or did I just imagine that?
No. We use manager tools, which isn't very creatively named. It's if you Google it, it's a thing. And,
Manager
I think
tools.
it's manager tools. It's two American ex-army guys.
Really?
They, I think they wrote 2 books, which they always update, and then they must have about, I don't know, it must be about 100,000 podcasts on absolutely every question a manager could ask themselves under the sun. It's great because they're very sort of pedantic and they just have a one way that they would do it.
Yeah.
And if you're a bit unsure about it, because let's face it, most managers are a bit unsure about what they're doing because it involves people and it can be awkward, and sort of your instincts are usually wrong or not always right. And having just someone who's done it before, the guys keep on repeating that they like teach the White House. And so if it's done it before and the methodology that's then also applied by some of the biggest companies in the world, you're probably well off following a similar principle.
Max, you know what I love about this is one of the things I think the UK is sort of as an economy is weak on, and I think it shows up in the productivity stats and a lot of things, is actually management as a discipline, as a craft, as a skill, as an activity. And I asked you a question about leadership, and you responded by talking about manager tools. I just think it's brilliant because I often experience just the opposite. I want to talk to somebody about what are you doing about management, and they respond by talking about their leadership development program. So thank you for that. I'll make sure we put manager tools in the show notes. I think it's great stuff. Do. How long have you been using it?
We must have started probably about 3 years in. Yeah. So when we were approaching sort of maybe the 30 employee mark, 40 employees, and just generally, I think it become things like communication, performance appraisals, performance management, also when things go wrong. if you don't have a system in place, if you don't have a methodology, it becomes almost impossible. Things that once you do them, and you see them being done in large
Yeah.
corporates, once you do them, they just seem like something you should have been doing all along. One-on-one meetings. Every manager needs to have one-on-one meeting with their direct every week. And these meetings follow a certain principle. They can be moved, they can be online if you're in different places, but they must happen. Otherwise, communication breaks down. Communication works sort of on an ad hoc basis if you're a tiny company, right? If you're 6 people sitting in an office, it sort of works. But then as soon as you're in more places and you're bigger and more complicated management structures, COVID, remote working, hybrid working, it is so important that people check in regularly. And sometimes you get pushback from people saying, well, that's quite a lot of meetings, or that's a lot of time in my diary. But actually you get that time back in droves because it condenses everything that needs to be talked about into that one meeting.
Well, and it usually ends up saving everybody a huge amount of time that gets lost through misunderstanding or just didn't, kind of missed the signal, didn't coordinate, whatever.
Correct.
If I could change the topic a little bit, how's coffee been changing? And how's Redemption Roasters within that? How's the offering, the brand, how's that all been evolving?
Good question. I think coffee as a commodity and a basic product hasn't changed that much. It's an ancient, old, wonderful tradition, culture around a product that most of us love. And I don't know the current figures, but our best-selling SKU is the flat white. And I'm sure that's the same for all of our competitors, and by quite a large percentage. And that hasn't changed over the 10 years that we've been doing this. And I don't think it's going to largely change over the next 10 years. But of course, there are trends, right? There are novelties. There are sometimes fads, but we take them seriously and we work with them. Iced drinks are becoming more and more important. Matcha has had a huge amount of success. We're now selling, I think it's about 7% of our drinks are matcha or other specialty type drinks that don't involve coffee. And then sort of menu innovation is quite important. You see the big and small players do more and more in that field. It involves matcha quite often, but also you have your winter warmers, whether that's hot chocolate with a little bit of chili in it, and then further menu innovation. We haven't really dipped our toe into it, but I was actually chatting to someone yesterday who's getting into that, which is just sort of on the health trend, right? Your your mushroom infused coffee, lion's mane, or a vitamin, or creatine, and so there's lots going on, and sometimes it's in opposition of the old school specialty minimalists scene, but at the same time, it's so important not to ignore what the customer ultimately wants. I mean, one good example is hot chocolate. If you open a cafe, you want to be serving hot chocolate, you have a choice between, I don't know how many hundreds of brands that will serve you the product to make the hot chocolate with. And the spectrum goes from sort of your very sweet, old school Cadbury powder, which is largely sugar and not very healthy, but a lot of people will find comforting.
A lot of people like it.
All the way to your single origin, 100% Madagascan, quite expensive, more difficult to work with because it comes in flakes product. There will be some absolute aficionados who will sort of taste the subtleties of the acidity and the sweetness here, but they will be in the minority, right? And there'll be a huge spectrum in between those two, where you have single origin chocolate, but it'll be mixed with some coconut sugar and maybe some other forms of sweetener. And I think finding that right middle way and not telling your customer, well, you need to have the Madagascan because it's much better for you, and by the way, it's much more subtle. But that's not our job. Our job ultimately is to listen to our customer and maybe take them by the hand a little bit, but not be pedantic and say, well, you have to have this because it's the best thing. And therefore we are serving, I don't know, your watermelon matcha. If I put my specialty coffee hat on, it's probably not a product that I'm proud of, but it sells very well. And there's lots of other players in the market that do menu innovation, and we need to follow that trend.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's sort of going to the other end of the business in some senses. When we talked last time, you had, we kind of touched on the whole situation around early release and chaotic kind of schemes there and probation overload and all that. Do you feel that's getting any better? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? What's your sense of where all that's going, and how does that
Hmm.
impact your business?
Yeah, two opinions here, and I know they're a little conflicting. On the one hand, I feel like the problem of criminal justice reform and our reoffending rates being so high is very ingrained in the structure. And something like that takes not days, months, or years to change, but probably decades. And the ultimate problem is one that most democratic countries face, and that is you don't really win an election by improving or even making softer or kinder the criminal justice system. That's the inherent problem that we're facing. That being said, I think with the sort of symbolic appointment of James Timpson, who's obviously a star and a big proponent of criminal justice reform and has been for a long time as Justice Minister, but then also with some of the initiatives that he even started before he came into post, such as the employment advisory boards, whereby prisons have specific employment advisory champions, prison employment leads, so-called, and whereby also prisons link up with employers like us more directly to place prison leavers into employment. That has really helped, and the numbers, I wish I could quote them precisely right now, but they're staggering, to the effect that the percentage of men and women in employment 6 weeks after release has tripled since over the last 2 years. So that is a really, really promising sign of result of the introduction of these. It is, of course, really difficult looking at these figures in isolation. You're talking COVID, for example, right? I mean, that's not just changed the business environment and how that's worked, but also release patterns, how prisons were working. So it's difficult comparing like for like, but the early signs are there and looking positive.
Well, it's great to hear some good news about something like that, because it does seem sometimes all you ever hear is this drumbeat of things not working and things not getting better.
It's true.
So that's really great to hear.
Yeah, I agree.
I think when we spoke last time, you mentioned that you tend to sort of think about Redemption Roasters in these sort of 3-year time horizons. So looking ahead, where do you see yourself in, say, 2028? You know, what would success feel like? What would it look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think right now we're in a little, because we've just sort of concluded a consolidation exercise, a cost-cutting exercise. So I think in 3 years' time, hopefully we will have had another growth spurt and really significantly taken the company a level up. Right now, we're not actively pursuing new shop openings. I think we're in a little bit of a wait and see, and really doing what we do best, and making sure that our customer service is the best it can be, that our team is structured in the best it can be, that our product is great, and really making sure that the sites that are working well are working even better. But no doubt there's going to be some movement in the market over the next 3 years, and hopefully we will have had a chance to act on that. And that goes along with structuring the team and the company around it. We're making some important hires right now. We're hiring a managing director. We're hiring a finance director. We've just announced that we'll be hiring a head of impact. Those are all really exciting hires and important to get right, because they are essentially the people running this company. And I think for Ted and me as founders, the ultimate aim is to step back further. Right. And hand over to people who are more competent and more experienced than we are in driving this business forward.
As a founder, as a co-founder, I suspect that's always a sort of or at least for some, it can be a difficult moment to kind of think, actually, there's somebody who would do this better than I can. I should let them do it. Are you seeing some other project or projects you might want to take on, almost to sort of take the Redemption Roaster concept and take it somewhere else? Or is it, no, we've done that, we're doing something completely different? What's your thinking about your own future over the next few years?
It's a good question. I haven't thought about it that much, to be honest. Right now, I'm still very much in the here and now. For me, sort of personally, until I can fully remove myself from the business, I'm not planning to do anything. Also, maybe not to put any pressure on me or the business. But that being said, I mean, we launched a foundation, which I'm a member of the trustees of, and obviously the foundation needs to sit quite separately, apart from me
Yeah.
having a double hat on, for which there are obviously quite a lot of terms in our agreement managing that potential conflict of interest. I'd be interested getting involved in the foundation more and making sure that that foundation grows in its impact. And so there's definitely an element of something that I'd love to continue along the lines of what I have been doing, but then also inspiring and potentially helping other social entrepreneurs do exciting projects. I always get really excited talking to other founders and other business leaders, and that can be absolutely any sector. An exciting story and a driven individual behind it, then I can usually get on board. So I could see myself in a role whereby I'd be speaking to other founders, other social entrepreneurs, and helping them if I can.
No, I could definitely see that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Anything else you'd like to share with our audience, or anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to kind of unpack a little bit?
So we've seen that whilst retail has been struggling, we've seen a real uptick in wholesale and in e-commerce, and that's been purely organic. It's not because we invested a lot into it. And that's quite interesting. And maybe it shows a bit of a market shift, which has been more permanent, because with COVID, obviously everyone started ordering online, and a lot of that has just moved reversion back to the mean, and people are now going out again. But actually, I feel like it has left a lasting leg up for e-commerce businesses, and it has created a bit more of a home coffee culture. And certainly for us, we've done really well out of subscribers. We get feedback in terms of when we put new instruction videos up on how to make a certain coffee, and so that's great. There seems to be a growing community of home coffee geeks that roasters like us can engage with. And that's exciting.
So could you see a point where actually the focus of the business shifts more towards the wholesale, or is that always kind of going to be 3/4 retail, 1/4 wholesale?
Well, those numbers are top line. Actually, bottom line, it's about half. And
really?
when you look at the areas where we're currently expanding and investing into, it is actually more wholesale. Our wholesale team has grown in size, and we're doing really exciting things with our wholesale partners. Some of them are like large catering companies that work with anyone from sort of your city law firms to hospitals to schools to tech companies, and of course, they pitch us to their clients, right? So they are sort of the intermediary. And that's quite cool to see that they believe in the quality of our coffee, but also in our impact story enough to put their name behind it. And that's actually been our biggest area of growth.
Yeah. So if I understand what you're saying, your brand sort of becomes part of their brand.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. Max, it's been great, really great. I mean, first of all, that you've touched on a few things in here that just have left me really, really charged up. Some positive news in there on a few things, which is great to hear.
Thank you.
And really good to hear that, okay, as you say, it's not a straight line. It is a bit jaggy up and down, and that you've been through a bit of a challenging time. But it sounds to me like it's put you in a really great place for continued success.
Yes,
so thanks again for joining us. Thanks for
checking in, Belden. It's really nice to chat.
No, definitely. I look forward to hearing the next update in maybe in another couple of years.
Yes, look forward to sharing it then.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.